Well, welcome everyone. I'm so glad you were able to take time out of your schedule to join us today. And I'm going to make sure we deliver some goods to make it worth your while. Today, we're going to be talking with Paul Musson about negotiating past financial jargon for a road to a better future. So, welcome, Paul. I'm really excited to have you here.
Well, thank you, Cindy. It's great to be here.
And for those of you who may not know him, Paul's a veteran investment professional. He's got over 30 years of experience. In that 30 years included leading the big mega Ivy funds at Mackenzie Investments. And then he founded Paddington Capital Management. And he also writes the Political Economy blog. Very clever name, by the way, Paul. And he is the author of the recently released Capital Offence, offering insights into economic systems and advocating for financial reform, which we direly need. So let's start with the book, Paul. Like, I'm really intrigued by your book, and the full title for our listeners is Capital Offence: Why Some Benefit at Your Expense, which certainly struck a chord with me. I'm sure it did for you as well. And we'll dig in a moment about sort of the heart of the book, but I wondered if you could share what was the impetus for you writing the book now at this time?
Well, for years as an investor, I had a sort of a front row seat, more I guess more in the trenches,
Yeah.
witnessing what was going on in the world from a capital allocation perspective, what was happening in stock markets,
Yeah.
and how central banks were interfering with what's called the price discovery mechanism of stock markets and essentially bailing out bad behavior.
Yeah.
And in the short term, it always seems like a good idea because when you bail out the bad behavior, all of a sudden the stock market starts soaring again. Everybody's making money. But those bailouts to the stock market and to asset prices, including housing, by the way,
Yeah.
come at great expense to Main Street, to the economy, to the average person. But it happens slowly. It's a very pernicious effect. It's happening slowly over time. And productivity growth starts to grind lower and lower, still growing, but not nearly as much as it should be. And this is a direct result of these policies. And so, I just got very frustrated watching this happen and seeing people suffer and knowing that these people don't know why they're suffering.
Yeah.
And in particular, the next generation, which
Yeah.
it really hurts. And it is causing this, it's almost like a class struggle between generations.
Yeah.
And the next generation, I have three daughters, by the way, and they're all in their 20s. And they
A
have
lot of
nobody.
estrogen in your house.
Yeah, oh, that's for sure. Well, people say, boy, it sounds like you're really outnumbered. In the house, I said I was outnumbered when it was just my wife and I. And but the next generation, they have more education. They work just as hard as we do, yet they can't even begin to dream of having the sort of life that we had.
Yeah.
And it's just not fair. And
Yeah.
that's why I wanted to write this book. And well, anyways, I'll stop there and then I
Well,
can.
and let's dig in on that because it's funny you touched on that. It was one of the things I wanted to ask you about because for the last, few hundred years, I would think that next generation has always been better off than the one that preceded it. And all of the scuttlebutt is that this is the first time in modern history that the opposite is going to be true. They're going to be worse off than us. And so why is that, Paul, do you think?
Yeah, so primarily because of housing,
Yeah.
also because of declining productivity growth. So I'll deal with housing first. So housing, we've all grown accustomed to making money on our home.
Yeah.
You buy a home, the price goes up, you build equity in your home, you sell it, you got a nice retirement nest egg.
Yeah.
That should not be happening.
Hmm.
So in a free market economy, the only way that you should be gaining material wealth is if you have created capital of your own,
Yeah.
and then you've freely exchanged that capital with someone else who've created their own capital. Now, we don't do a direct exchange. It's not like a barter economy.
Sure.
It's impossible to have a large economy that's all barter. Like if you made bar stools, you'd have to call the airline, how many bar stools for a
Yeah.
flight to California? Or, it
Yeah.
doesn't work. And so instead, we create capital in the form of a good or a service, and then we exchange that capital for money. So we sell, and then we use the money to go buy somebody else's capital.
Yeah.
So whatever capital you have should be a reflection of your contributions to society.
Hmm.
So I have all this.
Yeah.
Somewhere out there, cumulatively, people are this much better off.
Yeah.
So your gain did not come at the expense of anybody else,
Hmm.
right? Capital is created. So,
Yeah.
and that's the reason for the title of my book. So let's say you make 10 bikes, and let's say they're really nice bikes, they're
Yeah.
$1,000 each.
Yeah.
So you sell your 10 bikes, you got $10,000. But you don't spend it right away. You're saving it for a vacation at the end of the year. Now, I'm exaggerating here. So let's say the central bank, before you can spend your $10,000, let's say the central bank doubles the money supply. Now, your $10,000 in the bank, effectively, you've got 10 bikes stored up in that money,
Yeah.
right? You sold 10 bikes, you got $10,000. So effectively, you got 10 bikes of capital stored up in that $10,000. But if the central bank doubles the money supply, that newly printed money has no capital in it.
Yeah.
The central bank did not create any capital to get their hands on that money printed out of thin air. It only gains value by extracting capital from the rest of the money already in existence. So that new money extracts 5 bikes out of your
Yeah.
$10,000. So now your $10,000 only has 5 bikes instead of 10. And so now your $10,000 will only buy half as much as it would have done before
Yeah.
the central bank doubled the money supply.
Yeah.
So they took your capital from your money without your permission, and in some ways without your knowledge. You figured out because your money doesn't go very
Yeah.
far anymore, right? So they took your capital without your permission, and that's why the book is called Capital
I
Offence.
love it. And boy, as you're saying, first, I love the way you bring things down to the simple analogies that everybody can relate to. Because normally, I hear stock market and my brain starts to explode, and I
Yeah,
hear about
yeah,
capital and I go into flight or fight response. But so that
yeah.
I can't tell you how many times that's happened to me over my life. And I remember as a kid, I was a chronic saver. We grew up in a low rental apartment complex, so I saved and saved and saved. And as I kept my money sitting there waiting, it kept getting worth less and less as we went. It reminds me of, your mileage points or your hotel points. I saved them
Exactly.
through an entire career. And suddenly I'm like, what do you mean I only get one night after 20 years of saving? So,
No, exactly. Yeah, I mean, they debase your points faster than the
yeah,
central bank debases the
yeah,
currency. So frustrating. And it's really bad customer value
yeah,
proposition, which I
yeah.
talk about in the book as well. But anyways,
Well,
going back to like housing.
yeah,
And so if you have capital, it should be reflective of what your contributions to society were.
yeah,
So as we were discussing earlier, I live in Mississauga, suburb of Toronto.
yeah,
My wife and I, Cindy, we bought our house in 2001.
yeah,
And today, if we sold it, we would get 4 times
yeah,
what we paid for it. Now that's nominal terms.
yeah,
So there's some inflation there as well, but if you adjust it for inflation, it would still be like 2.5 times. So what was our contribution to society to
yeah,
justify taking that wealth from society?
yeah,
Zero.
yeah.
We
I've
made no
never thought of it.
contribution.
Yeah,
No, no, we don't. And none of us have done anything wrong.
yeah,
Like we've all played by the rules.
yeah,
Right? And you don't really think about it. You don't like to think about it. I just know I made money. Then you start to think
yeah,
you know something about real estate and you
yeah,
deserve it. You know, we don't,
yeah,
right? Because we can only make 2 or 3 times on our home
yeah,
because we force a younger couple or newly arrived immigrants to pay that much more for the same
yeah,
economic good that we bought.
yeah,
So when you look down on it from a societal perspective, when we sell our home for 4 times the amount that we paid for it, there's no capital created.
yeah. No, I get it.
Yeah.
That's,
All
yeah,
there is a reshuffling of capital within in the economy from the young couple's bank account into our bank account. We gain at their expense.
yeah, yeah.
It's just not fair.
Well, it's funny. I've never, and for our listeners out there, I don't know about you, but I have never thought about it that way. And what you're saying ideologically makes sense. And, for the very reasons you said at the beginning about how it increases, we sort of been putting all our money in real estate thinking it's safe. So maybe I better sell some of that before this idea catches on. But I wanted to touch on, because today, I mean, obviously we're living in such a divided world, and your recent book, I think, helps explain why Western societies are becoming increasingly divided and what we need to do about it. Tell me a bit about your thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, it's all related to this. And I believe it really took off in earnest around 2002. So this was in the wake of a very mild recession in the United States. It was, you remember in the 1990s, the dot-com
Yeah.
boom and
Yeah.
companies were listing and they would change their name to dot-com and the share price would go through the roof, even though they
Yeah.
had nothing to do with the internet.
Yeah.
And then when it crashed, so when it was booming, it caused what's called a wealth effect. So when people's assets are going up in price, they feel wealthier. That's the effect.
Hmm.
And so then they will use those assets as collateral
Uh,
or loans, and then
yeah.
they will use that money to go buy a large screen TV, buy an
Yeah.
SUV, whatever. And policymakers believe that's good for the economy and because it boosts GDP. Now,
Hmm.
I don't want to get too ahead of myself here, but all GDP is a measure of all final spending in the economy
Yeah.
or final
Nice
investment.
simple definition. I like that.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so policymakers want people to spend their money, consume, but they don't care how you do it. They don't care if you produce capital and then go spend your capital or you borrow.
Yeah.
But if you're doing it from borrowed funds, your ability to continue spending and contributing to GDP is limited because eventually you're going to hit a debt ceiling and you can't service any more debt.
Yeah.
And when you get to that point, what policymakers do or central banks, they lower interest rates so you can service more debt.
Yeah.
They drive your asset prices higher so you can use that for more collateral and take on more debt. And so asset prices, not housing prices, but like stocks,
Yeah.
stock markets should rise over time if it's a reflection of companies taking capital, investing that capital, and creating more goods. So there's more capital being produced.
Yeah.
Therefore, they're making more money. And then that pushes the share prices higher. And so stock markets go up. So that's a real wealth effect. A rising stock market is supposed to be reflective of capital being invested and good things happening and more people being hired. And that's all really good.
Yeah.
But if you're driving stock markets higher simply by driving interest rates to zero, and I can explain why that happens, but if you lower interest rates, typically stock markets are going to go
Hmm.
higher. But all that's happening there is the stocks are getting more expensive. They're going higher, not because they produce more capital, because interest rates went down to zero. So there was no real wealth effect. It was what I call a fake wealth effect. And so central banks became addicted to this, and so did Wall Street. And so in Canada and in the US, like through the 2000s and then after the great or global financial crisis, and through all the teens, interest rates were near historic lows,
Yeah.
despite the fact that the economies were not in a recession.
Yeah.
And they did this because their focus became asset prices rather than economic fundamentals, rather than price discovery mechanism. So, Mark, people with, let's say you've got capital and you decide that you want to invest in something and you decide how much risk you want to take on, what sort of interest rate you require on that investment. And then when you got millions of people all making those decisions, you get capital most efficiently allocated and the economy is the most productive because you've got skin in the game. You're more careful with your own capital than anyone else is going to be with your capital because
Yeah.
it's yours. But when central banks get involved, none of that capital is theirs.
Yeah.
All the capital they're playing with is belongs to everybody else.
Hmm.
And is very short term in nature. And so we're at this point now where they've driven asset prices so high and stocks are quite expensive. They've driven home prices higher. People are making money at the expense of others. The trouble is, and it's causing this divisiveness, right? So asset prices at the expense of
Sure.
the economy, people becoming divided. They see multi-billionaires making out like bandits. And so many people, especially in America, are struggling to pay their bills.
Yeah. Well, and you
right?
really struck a chord with me, Paul, when you were talking about that because we do go in debt. We have this illusion of having all of this, and then we go further and further and further in debt, and that leaves us all incredibly vulnerable. And I can understand. Now,
Yeah.
what's one of the most surprising or maybe disturbing things that you discovered while researching or writing your book?
Well, it was like a 15-year research
Yeah, I bet.
project.
Yeah.
And because I'm not an economist, but I got so angry at what was
Yeah.
happening. I said, I have to understand this. So I just went back to, right at the beginning and learning about all the different schools of economics and stuff like that. I mean, I learned so much, but I don't know that there was any sort of eureka moment. Like
Okay.
I already had that before I started
Yeah.
writing the book. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
And I said, I just got to get the truth out there.
Yeah.
But there are lots of sort of fallacious economic doctrines, some people call normative economics.
Well,
And
let's pull back the shroud on that for a moment. Like, what are, just before you jump on, like, what are some of those economic fallacies that we've been fed since, for all time in today's world?
well, yeah, so the one is that the first one that you deserve to make money on your home. Second, that driving asset prices higher is good for the economy. It's not. The economy should drive asset prices higher
Yeah.
rather than driving asset prices higher, pulling the economy up with it. It's
Yeah.
very destructive. The other is that policymakers believe, and most people it seems, that it's consumption that
Yeah.
drives an economy forward.
Yeah.
And it's very simple. They'll look at GDP, and around two-thirds of GDP in the US is final consumption.
Yeah.
And so they say, well, if we want to drive that GDP number higher, then we have to get people to increase their consumption. But you can only increase your consumption in two ways. You create capital or you borrow.
Yeah.
And so putting in policies that encourage the creation of capital over time takes time.
Yeah.
And you don't get that initial hit. And so you cannot consume yourself to riches.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I wish we could. That
Yeah.
would be great. It'd be a lot more fun.
Yeah.
But it's saving and investment that is what drives an economy forward. Of course, consumption is
Yeah.
the ultimate end goal of all this investment, right? But the more you invest, save and invest, the more that you can consume in the future,
Yeah.
right? And it's a big problem.
Well, it's interesting. Correct me if I'm wrong, but as you're saying that, it strikes me we've almost come to equate success with that consumption, right? And in fact, one of the reasons I started Art of Feminine Negotiation was this increasing concern about how we define success, right? Based on this
Yeah.
very competitive model. So I'm curious, how would you define success?
In from a business perspective or a life perspective?
Both, actually.
Yeah. Well, life perspective, obviously, just happy. Like, and for many years, I've been one of the happiest people ever. Like,
Nice.
I wasn't always that way.
Yeah, we both.
No, yeah. And then business success, you know, for younger people, I always, tell them to, try and pursue things that you really love doing. Obviously, it's like
Yes.
Mark Twain said, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in
Yeah.
your life. And it's not always possible, of course,
Yeah.
but don't stop chasing your dreams.
Yeah.
And often don't chase your dreams because you think it's going to result in a lot of money.
Yeah.
You know, chase your dreams because you're going to love doing what you do.
Yeah.
But I have found, and I've seen, sure you have as well, that sometimes or even often money can follow passion.
Yeah.
Like if you're passionate about something, these
Yeah.
entrepreneurs, I talk about it in the acknowledgement section of my book. These are my heroes.
Yeah.
You know, they just do something you couldn't imagine doing it every day, but they love it
Yes.
and they want to do it even better for their customers. And financially they've done really well. So money can often follow passion,
Yeah.
but passion rarely follows money. So if you chase the money first,
Yes.
I've been in the investment industry a long time, and I know of people in some parts of the investment industry, like some parts of investment banking, who on Sunday evenings, it's just a small number of people. It's not a bad industry, but
Yeah.
that they're physically ill.
Yeah.
And it's not just investment banking, it's because, and they're good paying jobs.
Yeah,
Now you got the big house, you got the bills, the
yeah,
private school, blah, blah, blah. You can't get off that treadmill.
yeah,
I said, oh, what an awful way
yeah.
to live your life.
And I want
And
to really put a pin in that just for a moment for our listeners. I mean, if you take nothing else away from this, that was a golden nugget that you just dropped for us there, frankly, Paul, and for our listeners. And it was interesting because when I asked about defining success, and you said, you mean personally? And you said, well, obviously being happy. And I love that that's so obvious to you. And I bet for a lot of our listeners out there, I challenge you, is that your definition of success? We have been so indoctrinated to see success as following the money and hoping someday, one day, we'll get to be able to live into our passion, as opposed to taking that opposite approach where being happy is the goal. And I love that you said, well, obviously being happy, because I don't think that is obvious for everybody. So I want to really put a pin in that for our listeners to challenge yourself. Are you following your passion and finding a way to make a living doing that? And are you insisting that your ultimate goal is being happy in life and spreading that? And Paul, on that, I'd love, what are your thoughts on, like, I think a lot of that skewed definition of success about following the money creates that competitive environment that we're seeing so much now, personally and in business. So I'd love your thoughts on a competitive versus a collaborative model, or a power over model versus a power with model. What are your thoughts on that?
I'll give you a great example. I use this example in my book. It's a company called Fastenal. And my investing style was to look for high quality companies that had great corporate cultures, which I could talk about if you're interested. But that is one of the only things that you have that can give you confidence with respect to what might happen in the future, because nobody knows what's going to happen. But if
Yeah,
you've got a great corporate culture business,
yeah,
you can have a pretty good idea how management is going to behave in this uncertain future,
yeah.
which nobody knows, which direction it's going to go. Anyways, so this company Fastenal, they're in Minnesota. I went to visit them, and they distribute fasteners like screws,
Okay.
stuff like that,
Yeah.
right? Pretty basic business.
Yeah.
So we go there, and the plant manager's taking us around, and he said, "Oh, check out this, or our customers love us. Check out Johnny over there. He's amazing." I said, "What the hell's going on here?" You think they're about to land a rocket ship on the moon or something, and they're distributing fasteners. So I asked him, I said, "Well, why do you love the company so much?" And he said, "Oh, it's management, ownership. They treat us like partners. We know there are bosses, but they don't treat us that way.
Yeah.
And it's not just lip service. They listen to what we have to say, they consider it and sometimes put it into action, and
Yeah.
and they and they all share in the success of the business." And then later he told me that like he forgot. He said, "Oh my God, I almost forgot to tell you. The CEO, he was the founder. He owned about a third of the company.
Yeah.
His wife, she also owned a significant share. She had passed away a number of years earlier. CEO takes all of her shares, distributes them to all the employees in the
Wow.
company, pays the capital gains tax out of his own pocket.
Wow. I,
So
oh, I'm in
can you
love.
imagine the loyalty
Yeah.
that he has from those people? Now, and I never met the CEO, but I'm pretty sure he wasn't thinking, okay, I'll do this. I can get these jerks to work more overtime. No,
Yes.
they're
Yes.
in it together. And because he was the founder, entrepreneur. He built that business from the ground up. So
Yeah.
all the jobs that the people in the company are doing, he did himself at one point.
Yeah.
So he's got great perspective and respect for what they might be going through and what it's like to do that job,
Yeah.
rather than career executive, who's never started a business, who come in, parachute in, and there are a lot of good career executives, don't get me
Yeah.
wrong. I know a lot of great ones. I've met some not great ones.
Yeah.
But that it makes such a difference. You can
Yeah.
see it and you can feel it. You
Oh,
know,
Paul,
it,
that story makes my heart sing. Most of my legal practice for 30 years has been representing workers, right, in labor law. And it amazes me how often you see the same mistake over and over, that division where they're trying to exert power over the workers. And one case I represent a lot of transit clients, and an employer who shall not be named in this spent millions, multi millions of dollars building a new fancy terminal, refused to take any input from the actual operators, the transit operators who are using it every day,
Uh-huh.
and just very dismissive, very incredible arrogance. And sure enough, they build and complete the terminal the very first run going through. As the employees, the workers had tried to tell them, there wasn't enough clearance, and every one of those buses trying to come through ends up clipping on the corner. Like, just so short-sighted and counterproductive. That's a beautiful story. And I just thought, as we talk about arrogance, I know in your book you talk about the dangerous sort of economic path that we're on. And you said, and I love this quote, that it's a sad story of arrogance and intellectual dishonesty for which literally millions of people are paying a stiff price, and it's going to get worse. So you've talked a little bit about some of that, I think, those threads, but I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about that. That really struck a chord.
Yeah, and when I write these things, I look back, ooh, maybe it was a little harsh there, but. But well, you should have seen my first version before I toned it
I
down,
bet.
you know. And yeah, it's just this arrogance that some policymakers, not all, think they have a right to dictate what people should be doing with their money.
Yeah,
And that makes me so angry.
yeah,
And that because they think consumption is so great for the economy, they want to force you to spend your money. Now, here's one of the main dangers, one path that some want to go down. So they take interest rates down to zero, trying to encourage you to, you're not getting anything on your
yeah,
savings. So some want to take it into negative territory, and that happened, right?
mm,
In the teens, there was $18 trillion in bonds around the world paying a
yeah.
negative interest rate. So you had to pay someone to lend them your money.
Wow.
So, they would like to take it down to, let's say, if you're not spending enough, okay, let's take interest rates down to negative 5%. And that'll force Cindy to take the money out of her savings account instead of
Yeah,
saving it because she doesn't want to be effectively taxed 5%
yeah,
per year. She's going to take it out and she'll spend it, and that will boost the GDP number.
yeah,
But instead of doing that, what you would do is you would just take your money out of your savings account and put it in a safe,
yeah,
right? You hold it in cash. Now they can't tax you that 5%, which is one of the reasons, perhaps the main reason, why they want to get rid of cash and have
yes,
central bank digital currencies.
yep,
So that option will now not be available to you. So your options, if they took interest rates down to -5, would be to leave it in there and get taxed 5% per year, or take it out and buy overpriced stocks, which they like because you're going to help drive stock prices higher,
yeah,
or buy an overpriced home and drive overpriced homes even
yeah,
higher. Those are going to be your choices,
yeah,
right? And then I just find it very disingenuous. All of a sudden, they're talking about, oh, well, with cash, there's all this organized crime, but you're never talking about it before.
yeah,
All
yeah,
of a sudden, that's their motive,
yeah,
So this intellectual dishonesty,
yeah,
and then the arrogance. Don't get me wrong. I think it's more arrogance and not bad intentions.
yeah,
I think they actually do believe that this is good for the economy,
yeah,
and that the benefits of making people billionaires by driving because 90 odd percent of the stocks are owned by the top 1%
yeah,
or whatever. That's right.
yeah,
And they actually believe that making them billionaires, that the benefits will trickle down to everybody else somehow.
yeah,
Don't.
which has never happened.
No, they don't. And you would think that, after doing this for a while,
Yeah, we might learn.
and seeing the world become increasingly divided, seeing wealth disparity grow even wider,
Yeah,
that they would maybe take a step back and say, man, maybe something's not working here.
yeah,
But now their reputations are at stake,
yeah,
right? Because those policies got us to this place. And if they admit it was wrong, well, oh, you're to blame.
yeah,
So I understand why they don't.
yeah,
Most politicians, not all, but most don't really have a firm grip of how an economy works.
yeah,
And so within economics is not a natural science or a hard science like physics
yeah,
or chemistry. It's a social science because
yeah,
it's based on human action,
yeah,
people, decision making. And so there are a number of schools of thought within economics, and people view economics very differently. And so politicians are naturally going to gravitate to the School of Economics that recommends that they spend more money and take on debt and print
Yeah.
more money,
Yeah.
right? So it's perfectly understandable that this happens.
Yeah.
And it's because people don't have a good understanding of even what money is. The first couple of chapters of in my book are about money, explaining what it is.
Yeah.
And if you don't even have a basic understanding about money and
Yes.
capital,
Yeah.
then you're for sure going to fall victim,
Yeah.
to these easy solutions, these free lunch solutions.
Yeah.
There's no free lunch. Somebody always pays.
Yes. And you layer onto that all of the baggage that we all carry about money. But I want to circle back because when you first answered the question, and I love that you're so honest and sort of transparent here when you said, "Oh gosh, sometimes I look back and think how harsh. If you should have seen my first draft." And I laughed because I totally resonate with that. And for our listeners, I think there's some really important message to be gleaned there as well from our, all of life is a negotiation, whether we're negotiating this high finance or whether we're negotiating our relationships. And often we send off that knee-jerk response, whether it's something we say to our kids or our intimate partner or a business partner or a competitor. In our writing with emails, even more dangerous because you don't get tone of voice in that. Take the time to always go think about what you want to say. Go over your emails again before you send them when you're taking a position, because I have become much more intentional. I mean, in a career as a lawyer, as you can imagine, everything was about that bite, right? Getting that bite, trying to get the edge up, and just find a way to soften it where you're going to be able to get more buy-in, where you're going to be able to convince that, winning isn't powering your position over somebody else. That always comes back to bite you in the ass at some point in any ongoing relationship, certainly. So I love that. Whoo, you should have seen my first draft because I think that's such a great reminder for all of us when we conduct ourselves out there in the world. Take a moment, pause before you say something. And when you have the luxury of putting something in writing, soften it. I'll often, if I'm sending something that I know is going to be controversial, I'll call my daughter or my boys wouldn't care, but I'll say to my husband, this is what I'm thinking of sending. What tone do you get from this to get some feedback? So
Exactly. Yeah, two things related to that. So my blog, which I send out every week,
yeah,
my wife and my eldest daughter edit it for me. And they will let me know, okay, Paul,
yeah,
you crossed the line there,
yeah,
anyways. But when I was with my investment team at McKinsey, we strived for intellectual honesty at all times.
yeah,
Now, intellectual honesty, there's two parts to it. It's your own honesty, your own
yes,
truth, trying to be honest with yourself, which is
yeah,
tricky at times, right?
yeah,
But also how to extract truth from those around you. So, as you said, not making it like a fight or a debate.
yeah,
I never wanted debates, but I wanted, if you disagreed, I wanted to hear your truth.
yeah,
How can I make you comfortable to first hear my truth,
yeah,
open those doors, make you relax, and then even more comfortable that you can now share your truth with me, even if you think your truth is wacky.
yeah,
And I used to tell my clients this. All my clients were financial advisors across Canada, and that the team when they would be looking for a stock because we look for high quality companies,
yeah,
they look at the company and they would say, "I don't want to buy it because there might be an even higher quality one out there."
yeah,
Well, it probably is, but you found this one and it's a reasonable price, so buy it. And if you find another one, you buy that too.
yeah,
That's the analogy I use. I use with said, so when my wife and I met back in 1991,
yeah.
in a world of billions of people, there was probably out there a better match for both of us. I mean, what are the odds that you're going to meet just the perfect person, like the one in the whole world, right? But when I say that to my wife, I don't say, somewhere out there was a better match for me than you. If I do that, all hell breaks loose, right? So instead, I say to my wife, you know what? When we met out there was probably a better match for you than me. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden I see her, she's considering it now. So how you deliver the message,
I love that.
you know?
That's so good. Also, a healthy dollop of survival instinct there, Paul, for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
That's,
But it's a lot of work.
yeah,
It's a lot of work. Think like you said, when you send an email, don't send it right away. Maybe send it the next day. That's what I used to do.
yeah,
I would only send it the next day. I would write it that night.
yeah,
the next, sleep on it. What's
Yeah.
it that Napoleon said? Night brings counsel or something like
Yes.
that. This morning he said, "Oh my God, I feel completely different."
Yeah.
Or yeah, I got to take that word out, or just go over and talk to them.
Yeah.
So you can get
Yeah.
those intonations and stuff like that. But that is it's a lot of work.
Well, and I think it's great that you talked about being honest with yourself to start. And one of the things I do, like integrity, we talk about integrity a lot, and most people think of it only in terms of showing up with that moral compass. But also, based on its original Latin, integrity is about being, like, based on the root integer, being whole with yourself, which is exactly the point that you're making, Paul, right? Because when we go in and we take a position that's contrary to our values, and that's somewhere deep inside that we know that's the case, we don't show up authentically and we're going to get worse outcomes. So, and I want to circle back. You mentioned your blog, and I want to make sure to give you a shout out. Like I say, I think the title's just so clever. So,
Thank
what
you.
do you hope that people take away, or what should people expect from your blog, Political Economy?
Yeah, so I started it in June of 2022, and I just was sending it out to my wife and my three girls.
Yeah.
And because, I'm reading the financial press all the time, and I just wanted them to understand what was going on.
Yeah.
And so then it's key to put it in terminology or words that they understand that are not intimidating. And so it's just snippets here about what certain companies do, how their sales are, and why. If somebody said the economy is strong, I will say, no, it's not, and here's why. And just like explanations. And in my book, I use a lot of analogies and stuff like that to help people
Yeah.
understand. And then my wife and my daughters, well, can I send it to my friends? Yeah, go ahead, whatever. And then I started getting emails from people. Oh, someone's been sending this to me. Can you put me on? I said, yeah, sure. Then I look up the person. It might be a vice chairman of RBC Capital Markets, or it'd be a chief investment officer, or a portfolio manager, or a teacher, or a
Exciting.
nurse, or whatever.
Yeah.
And and they all seem to appreciate the approach
Yeah.
of not trying to impress, but
Yes.
trying to educate. And I used to try and impress years ago in presentations. I could talk about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was sort of the goal. And I've had great feedback. I got feedback from a lot of feedback, but from one lady, I don't even know her, but she said, she just out of the blue, I just want to thank you for this, that whenever I read your blog, I don't feel like you're talking down to me.
Yes.
And each blog is a topic of discussion at the dinner table with my kids.
Yeah.
I said,
Yeah.
that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
I hope I'm getting it right.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you said that. And again, for our listeners, I wanted to, because I think Paul was being very humble, but he takes complicated economic principles or issues and things that are happening and reduces them in a way that, much like this conversation, that's understandable with that anybody, whether you're at the highest level or whether you're a total novice at this stuff, that you can appreciate the concept and take something away. And you had mentioned about impress, and that, again, a little light went off for me about that you used to try and impress. And I got to, in my work in negotiations and trying to educate people about more effective ways to negotiate, so many of us are taught to show up from a place of ego, right? That we need, that the person who's the better negotiator is the one who's talking the loudest and the longest. And, the opposite is true. So I'd love if you could just hit on that for a second about,
Yeah,
here's how I
sure.
used to do it and why you switched.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I was younger, when I first started doing presentations to advisors, and you'd be up on stage and, early days, you're super nervous
Yeah.
and trying to memorize your stuff and whatnot. And, you're trying to sound smart,
Yeah.
right? And you think, well, I have to sound smart in order to impress them, in order
Yeah.
to them to be willing to invest in our funds. That's how it works. And then I started getting caught up in small white lies.
Yeah.
And like I wasn't saying an untruth, but I was leaving stuff out that I knew would have been pertinent and might have changed their decision.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was okay. And then, but then I started getting caught out. So
Yeah.
an advisor would say, well, I know you're saying this, Paul, but last year you said that.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, well, I don't remember saying that, but I can certainly imagine myself saying that. And I knew why I was saying that.
Yep.
I got caught a couple of times. And that's it.
Yeah.
I'm not doing this anymore. And being perfectly honest with you, initially I wasn't doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah.
I was doing it because I was getting embarrassed, getting
Yeah.
caught.
Yeah.
This is embarrassing. I don't want to have to worry anymore about, it's like, I forget who it was, but it said, if you speak the truth, you never have to remember what you said.
Yep.
And so I said, that's what I'm gonna do.
Yep.
And it worked even better.
Yep.
We gained so many clients, and it was so refreshing. I never had to worry about what I said
Yeah.
before. And I found that I got great client outcomes.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is because there are different investment styles. So you explain what you're doing, how you're investing clients' money. So now the financial advisor can decide whether or not that style is appropriate for them and their clients.
Yeah.
But they can only make the correct decision if you fully explained exactly what it is you do.
Yeah.
If you're just telling them what they want to hear rather than what you really do, then that could be a bad outcome if they put their money there because eventually they're going to get pissed off because
Yeah.
you're going to be doing something that they didn't expect,
Yeah.
right? So not getting a sale sometimes is a victory,
Yes. Yeah.
right? And so I have so many great client relationships across the country, and a number of them are on the political economy blog,
Yeah.
which is great. So I've kept in touch with them, and it's just such a better way to do
Yeah.
business.
And Paul, and thank you because you're so beautifully modeling vulnerability here and that integrity that you're speaking about. And again, I can't emphasize enough for our listeners. We have been so conditioned to believe that vulnerability is a weakness. Hold your cards tight to your chest in business, in negotiating. And in fact, the opposite is true, as Paul just so beautifully demonstrated, both here by being vulnerable with us, but also in his actual business relationships. That sometimes when we're able to allow ourselves to be a little bit more open and honest and coming from a place of absolute integrity, we open up a discussion that may not otherwise have taken place. People trust us more. You're building rapport, which allows for stronger relationships, which invariably ends in better outcomes for you and also for the other party. So, such a great lesson. And Paul, I can't believe how quick our time has gone here. This has been just a great conversation. So many
Thank you.
more threads to be pulling. You'll have to get working on that sequel, and we'll have you back to maybe tackle another angle of this one day as
Great.
well. And I
Yeah.
normally like to end by asking, what's one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've had in your life? Doesn't have to be on this topic at all. Just one of those aha moments
Yeah.
that made you
So
speak
there
it.
was the one that I mentioned about, stop trying to impress people. But I go back, the one that sticks in my mind, this is back in 1984, so a long time. And I was having an argument with my girlfriend at the time on the
Yeah.
porch. And I was a great arguer. I probably should have gone into law, whatever. But I had no interest in the truth. I just wanted to win.
Yeah.
And I could argue anything. And like I was horrible. And I think I'm bad now. You should have seen me then. And anyways, after a while, she just stopped. She said, "Look, just stop." Said, "I can't out argue you, but I know I'm right."
Yeah.
Inside, I thought, I know you're right too. I just couldn't tell her.
Yeah.
Now, needless to say, that relationship didn't last very long. And I remember she left, I went back in the house, and I just said to myself, I've got to change.
Yeah.
I cannot keep doing this. I'm driving people away. And so ever since then, it's been a pursuit of intellectual honesty,
Yeah.
being brutally honest with myself about my own feelings, why I get hurt, or why was I jealous of this, or
Yeah.
right. Don't be ashamed of them. Just, okay, this is how you feel. So
Yeah.
why do you feel that way? And then can we grow out of it? Can we make things better? But it's a long journey.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. And so, geez, you came to the epiphany about the power of what I call it the art of feminine negotiation, but what you described is that, and you came to that epiphany decades before I did. So you put me to shame here, Paul. Now, where can people learn more about you? Where should we be directing them in our show notes?
So my website is it's called Paddington Capital, and it's MGMT, so it's short for
Okay.
management.com. Paddington Capital, MGMT.com. On there, I have all my past blogs, which are in written and in audio form. And so I post every week. I have a summary of my book there as well. Yeah, and then I'll be putting a link to this there as well and on the website, and people can sign up on the website for free emails or free updates when I publish a new
Yeah.
blog.
Well, that's fabulous. And for our listeners, don't panic if you're driving or you couldn't get that down fast enough. We'll make sure to put that information in the show notes. And I encourage you as well, check out his blog, Political Economy, and the political is Paul for Paul. And also check out his new book, Capital Offence. And thank you so much for joining us here today, Paul. I've really enjoyed our conversation and got lots of value.
Well, I did too. Thank you very much, Cindy.
And for our listeners, I have no doubt you took away lots of value from this episode. I love how Paul was able to take issues that make me break out in a cold sweat and make them totally manageable and easy to understand. I've certainly come away with some epiphanies here. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't done that already, and share this episode with anyone that you think can take some value from this message as well. And let's face it, given the current divide and given that the world operates on finance, everybody's going to be able to benefit from this episode and Paul's wisdom that he shared. And again, before we sign off, I'd love to talk just quickly about some ways we can work together. I certainly teach from whether you're a seasoned attorney who's been around practicing forever and a day or a very early stage in your career. I love to jump in and help find a better way to practice, right? To be more authentic, less battle worn, and ultimately be significantly more effective in the process. And I certainly would love to opportunity to either help you personally or your firm be able to thrive and stand out while still bringing a better way to practice law to your firm. If that sounds interesting, check it out at www.practicingwithpurpose.org. And that's a wrap for this episode. Until next time, go forth and find ways that you can practice on purpose. Find a better way to practice law so you can rekindle that passion and make a difference in the world, negotiating your best life on your terms. Until next time, take care.